All right, well, my next guest says that the lyrics of the Clash iconic hit, Should I Stay or Should I Go, has been ruminating in her head, particularly the chorus, right? If I go, there will be trouble, and if I stay, it will be double. Joining me now, KPMG Chief Economist Diane Swonk. You know, Diane, I think it's an excellent example of what must be going through the minds of Jay Powell and company. And then, of course, you got your report this week titled Navigating Policy Purgatory, Inflation and the Challenge for the Fed. What would be more unforgiving in terms of a mistake? Cutting too soon or not hiking enough?
Cutting too soon, because what we saw was Jay Powell he was asked the question about stagflation. He lived the 1970s, as did I. I was a little younger than him back then, but I remember it well. And we had years of double-digit inflation, excuse me, during that period, which I think is important. But more importantly, what got us there? The biggest mistake the central bank made under pressure from political forces was to cut too soon in an effort to stimulate employment, and that ended up coming back as stronger inflation and higher employment later on, and created that stagflationary rising inflation and rising unemployment rate that we had in the 1970s. So that's why it's the worst of the two mistakes. What he sees now is, what he would rather see is that by holding rates higher for longer, we have a kinder, gentler cooling of inflation in its last mile. It's not coming from a double-digit pace, and to do that without the pain of an increase in unemployment. That's the goal, and that's what he's trying to shoot for, and I think that's where we want them to be.
Here's the thing, though. He did warn at Jackson Hole that there would be pain. I guess we could call it the infamous pain speech right now. Also, Arthur Burns, right, in his biography, to your point.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and the markets reacted the way the Fed wanted it to react. And, of course, Arthur Burns, in his biography, to your point, said he had a lot of political pressure. He did want to hike rates. I don't know that Powell has the same political pressure, but we've heard folks in the administration hint of lower cuts, even President Biden. But the stagflation part, last week he said there was no stag or no inflation. However, I'm just thinking today, just with news today, low-income consumers now are being mentioned a lot more with these earnings reports, unlike any time post-pandemic. And most of them are pulling back, outside of maybe a few experiences, right? Earnings expectations are starting to pull back. And of course, then we had the inflation expectations from the University of Michigan today. So maybe demand slowing on one side, inflation going up on the other side. Isn't that the very core part of the stagflation formula?
Well, remember, like I said, stagflation, we had double-digit inflation for years. And we had unemployment peak out at 9% during the 1970s, and then have to go up into the double digits to get rid of this. And it was a 2-decade-long inflation. Inflation tripled in the 1960s during the height of the Vietnam War. Also, the then Fed president was under political pressure by a different president than the one in the 1970s during the 1973 response to OPEC and the oil embargo. But it was two mistakes, not just one. It was several mistakes of cutting too soon prematurely. So we are seeing a situation. The best thing for the Fed to do now is to get inflation under control, especially for those low-wage consumers, because we do know that wages and the employment cost index for accommodation and food services, for retail, they've slowed down to a pace that's now below the pace of inflation, and that's concerning for them. These are the workers that had their moment where they got their wages leveled up, moved from the shadows of the economy to become essential workers, only to be burned by inflation. So the Fed's #1 job is to get rid of that inflation, hopefully without a surge in unemployment. And I think that's the strategy. Whether or not we can get there without a surge in unemployment is the unknown answer to the question.
Yesterday, Mary Daly talked about two paths, and the market actually rallied when she hinted that, maybe a little bit of a spike in unemployment will be the reason to cut rates. But then just today, we've had two Fed officials throw cold water in that. Bowman saying that cuts weren't, quote, warranted just yet, and Logan saying that policy may not be tight. Now, granted, they both have made similar comments in the past, but it sort of underscores what we came in with that Class song, right? There's a serious challenge here for this Fed, isn't there?
It is, and as we get closer to this point of cutting, you're going to see the fissures within the Fed. And there's sort of another side to that song was it was the last song that, was penned by the leader of the band, Mick Jones, and the band broke up after that song became a hit. Actually, it became a hit after the band had broken up, which is kind of amazing. But I think that's important because you're going to see more fissures within the Fed. Now, the Fed's not going to break up, but of course they should have a difference in a view as we get closer to this point where you cut, because it's not precise. This is when it's much more of an art than a science, and that's why you're hearing that. What you're hearing from Mary Daly is that what she worries about is the two sides of the risk. On one side of it, you can get inflation more entrenched. On the other side, when unemployment rises, it tends to rise in a non-linear fashion. What that means is it tends to go up quickly. So far, we've not had that, and we've been very lucky. But the Fed doesn't want that either. And as much as you're right, Jay Powell was ready to feel that pain, the euphemism of central bankers for higher unemployment. He isn't any longer. He made that clear in December. And I think most of the Fed is now in that position as well, that they don't want to see, if they can at all avoid it, a surge in unemployment.
Diane, I love the idea of what you just said about these workers coming out of the shadows and being recognized as essential workers, not, bearing the brunt of other things that have come before them on this inflation front. Great stuff. Thank you so much, Diane. Have a great weekend. I'll be hearing that song over and over again the whole weekend for sure.